Okay, y'all focus a little bit and let's talk about, or begin talking about, the early exploration of Georgia. Bunch of Europeans, of course, come and it has a tremendous impact. One of our essential questions is, there are two of them. One of them is, how did early European contact affect the culture of the Mississippian Indians? And you already know that answer. We've talked about it. What happens to the Mississippian Indians? They die. They're diseased. They get, basically, they disappear for the most part. The second one you may not be familiar with, but it is, what were the purposes of the Spanish missions and where were they located in Georgia, or in what became Georgia? So what were they and where were they? And we'll probably get into that tomorrow. All right. So those are going to kind of guide us through the next couple of days. The first the first Europeans to come to North America were the Spaniards. 1492, what happened? Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and I never can remember the rest of that. There's probably a reason for it. But Columbus discovers what? San Salvador. Okay? He doesn't actually land on the North American continent. He thought he was in the Indies. In fact, he makes 4 or 3 more journeys to this place. He never makes it to the North American continent. He thought he had found the East Indies. He was wrong. But there were people in Spain who realized that he had found a new world. And so Spain began to explore this new world. They sent out conquistadors, Spanish explorers, conquistadors or conquerors, to take control of what they have discovered. Now, I don't know about you, but if any group of people comes to where I live and they have the name Conqueror, I don't think I want anything to do with them. And it does not turn out well for the Native Americans. But before we can really talk about that, we've got to talk about Spain and Portugal. Spain and Portugal are probably the 2 most powerful countries in the world at this time. They're both small. Today, they're still small, and they're much less powerful. They're not really major players, to use that terminology, on the international scene today. But in 1492, 1493, they were very powerful. And they were also Catholic. Both nations were Catholic nations. And because of this, because they're both Catholic, the Pope, who's the head of the Catholic Church, steps in, Pope Alexander VI, steps in and draws what became known as the line of demarcation. Took out his big map and just simply drew a line at the 38th line of latitude. So it goes this way. He basically split the world in half. Gave half to Spain, half to Portugal. Why could he do that? He was the Pope. And both nations are Catholic. So they're going to listen to him. But one of the things that we know from studying our connecting themes is anytime somebody does something, there are what that follows? Consequences. Intended, right? And then unintended. So the Pope's intended consequence was what? No more war. No, right? You sure? You don't look too sure. To stop war, right? Doesn't want 2 Catholic countries fighting against each other. He might have to choose. He doesn't want to choose. And so he draws this line of demarcation and divides the world between Spain and Portugal. And here's what it looked like. The purple line is the original line of demarcation, 38 degrees, all the way around the world from top to bottom. Okay? This is all Spanish. This is all Portuguese. Okay? The Treaty of Tordesillas, a year later, moves it 12 degrees west. So now this is Spanish, but what happened? Part of South America becomes what? Portuguese. Brazil sits right in here. What do they speak in Brazil? Portuguese. So there's still that that impact felt by the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494. But Portugal still got all of this, and things rock along until 1529. And look how far east the line of demarcation gets moved. So now, all of this is Spanish. Is that all of the world? No, but you can see it from there, can't you? I mean, that is literally the entire world. Now, who did this? What was his name? Pope Alexander. Pope Alexander VI. His intended consequence was, don't want Spain and Portugal going to war. So he stopped that. But there were some unintended consequences. Look at this. This is the unintended consequence. That Spain would become the most powerful country in the world. For at least the next 100 years. Spain is the most powerful country in the world. That is not what Pope Alexander intended, but yet that's what happened. Now, why, may I ask, why did Spain and Portugal listen to the Pope? They're Catholic nations. They're Catholic countries. Keep that in mind as we go through the next couple of days, that Spain and Portugal were both Catholic, and so they're going to listen to the Pope. They're going to do what the Pope says. Even if they might not like it, they're still going to do what the Pope says. So Spain claims all the New World, right? North America, South America. And they name what becomes North America, or what we now call North America, La Florida, the New World, La Florida. What does that mean? It means island of flowers. They thought that Florida was an island. How stupid were they? Really not all that stupid. Why? What is Florida? It's a peninsula. It's surrounded by water on how many sides? And if it's unexplored, you don't know if it's attached to another body of land, right? So based on what they knew, they said it was an island. They figured out pretty soon, this is not an island. This is not an island. It's something else. She laughing at me. Right. So, the first Europeans that come to the New World are Spanish. And they are slave traders. Imagine that. This problem, this issue of slavery has infected the New World for much longer than African slaves were brought to the continent. And so slave traders, they began to raid communities on the coast, and they would take people into slavery. They would sell them in Europe. They would sell them in South America, other nations in the Caribbean. One of these was a man named Lucas Vasquez de Ayllón. We wanted to Americanize that, we would call him Alan, but we're not. It's Aeon or Aeon. Wow. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. So, we remember him. He is in this classroom today because he attempted to create or to build the first permanent settlement in what is now Georgia. Go to the coast, find Sapelo Island. Nearby is going to be Sapelo Sound. And that's where Aeon decides to establish a permanent settlement. Did it work? What do you think? 50-50. Did it work? No, it didn't. But it looked promising. He arrives with 600 people, including first African slaves. And we typically look at slavery starting in the early part of the 17th century, 1614, somewhere in there, certainly before 1615. But they were not the first African slaves. They came in 1526. And it didn't work. It lasted 6 weeks. They were not prepared to feed themselves, so there was starvation. The Indians didn't like the fact that they were there. They were what? They had already been impacted by slave traders. Here comes these white Europeans. What is their initial thought? They're going to take us captive. And so the Indians don't wait for them to be taken captive. They attack. The slaves rebel. Who can blame them? And Ion actually dies. We don't know if he died from starvation. I don't know if he died from starvation. Probably not. Was it during an Indian attack? Was it a part of the slave uprising? Or was it illness? Take your pick. Look it up. Google it. And see what it says. Regardless of what happened to him, his settlement does not last. And 150 at the end of it, 150 people pack up and go back to the Spanish Caribbean where they had come from. So, 1526, not that long, what? How many years? 1492, that'd be 34 years after Columbus discovers America, even though we really know he didn't. Who was the first European to come here? Leif Erikson. He was some of my people. He was a Viking. You don't have to know that. But we do credit the Spaniards with being the first to explore North America. And there's a very good reason for that, and we'll talk about that in just a sec. All right. So that brings us to Hernando de Soto. Anybody ever heard of Hernando? Okay, good. So I get to introduce you to Hernando de Soto. He is the first European to explore what is now Georgia. He actually does a pretty extensive exploration of the entire southeastern part of what is now the United States. In 1539, 13 years after Ion decides to create a permanent settlement, De Soto lands near Tampa Bay, Florida, what is today Tampa Bay, Florida. 700 men. And he begins to explore and conquer because he is a conquistador. He is a conqueror. What do conquerors do? They conquer. And do they care who's there already? No. There you go, brother. They come to explore and to conquer. If it was just the exploration, I would have no trouble with Hernando de Soto. But they come to conquer as well. He is already a very wealthy man. Yes. Yes. Late to class, gonna go to the bathroom. Goodness gracious. Should I put you on a timer? 1.5 minutes. That's not very long. Some of y'all couldn't even walk that far in 1.5 minutes. So, De Soto comes to conquer. And what happens to the people that are there? Remember who they are. They are the Mississippian period Indians, right? And so you can imagine, or maybe you can't, I hope you can't, imagine what De Soto does to the Mississippian Indians. He explores all around the southeast. He makes it as far west as, actually he goes beyond the Mississippi River and comes back to it. And it's there that he dies. We don't know, we think, we're pretty certain that he died from illness, a disease, some kind of fever that he contracted, but he dies. And his men are so fearful that the Indians, the Native Americans, will find DeSoto's body. They'll dig him up and desecrate his body, be very disrespectful to it, that they bury him in the Mississippi River. They wrap him in cloth with weights and they bury him in the Mississippi River so that the Native Americans can't get their hands on him, because they would have, they would have cut his head off, they would have dismembered him, maybe burned him, whatever. And the Spaniards didn't want that to happen. So that gives you a little idea of what the Indians thought about Hernando de Soto. He's very cruel. He's cruel to the Indians. He's cruel to the Native Americans that he came across. But think about it. He came from South America. Who lived in South America? What great nation? The Incas, right? And then the Aztecs were up in Central America, Mexico. Well, he had already been to South America. And so he's very wealthy because it was a very wealthy nation. It was a lot of gold, a lot of resources. And so he had been cruel there. He comes to North America and he follows suit. He treats them the same way he taught those in South America. He's very cruel. He looks at them as savages. Now, I don't know about you, but if I look at somebody as a savage, then I am essentially saying, you are beneath me. You are less than me. And that's what happens. That's the problem when we begin to look at people and we think, that person's less than I am. How many of y'all watched the Braves last night? Did you see Jock Peterson? He's got hair that looks like Eli's. You said, I like that. But they had Jock Peterson's little brother on TV. His first name is Champ. Champ Peterson. He has Down syndrome. He's in his 20s, Down syndrome, and he sat and he gave this beautiful interview about his relationship with his brother Jock. He's also a four-skilled athlete, competes in the Special Olympics, and it's really good. But I thought as I watched that, I thought, not that long ago, people would have looked at people like Champ and they would have thought, why is he even alive? Why didn't his parents get rid of him at birth or before birth? And that's when we look at people that are different than us, either racially or physically or religion, or when we look at people and go, well, they're homosexual, so they're beneath me, then people stop being people. And you know what happens when people stop being people? We enslave them. We enslave them. It's easier to bully somebody when they're not as smart as I am. They're not as pretty as I am. Or, it's easier, to bully people like that. And I've used this all day long. When I look at a person, I go, he's not really a person. He's less than I am. He's beneath me. Then it becomes easier for me to get rid of that person. It becomes easier for me to kill that person. Look at the Sudan. Y'all have read about that, right? Some of you read A Long Walk to Water, right, last year. Okay. You studied about the Sudan and civil war, genocide. Think about World War II and not in Nazi Germany, looking at people as being less than them. And it was easy to kill 7 million Jews. Did it without a thought because they didn't view them as human beings. That's what DeSoto does. And I know I've ran it and raved long enough, but that's what he does here. So it's easy for him to enslave them. It's easy for him to do other things. And you're going to see some of those things in just a minute. I'll show it to him. It's pretty gnarly, isn't it? If you got a weak stomach, y'all just ate lunch, so. Okay. Well, that's not it. But think about it. I want you to think about this. Is Hernando de Soto. This is a portrait that was painted of him. That might be what he was dressed like when he stepped foot on the North American continent. How long do you reckon that lasted? Yeah. Could you imagine? How many of y'all got really hot this morning? Okay, I came in and I was sweating, because it was so humid. I could not, and I was in this, so I sweated. I could not imagine what that might have been like. So again, if he came to the continent looking like that, I don't think he looked like that very long. Now, here's what you need to kind of ready yourself for. You ready? Jock? That's not it. Ha! Now, this is something we need to just discuss briefly. This is the route that we think De Soto took. We know that he came into Florida at Tampa Bay. Pretty sure he took this route. We know that he came through South Georgia. We have done some archaeological digs down in southwest Georgia, and we've discovered European artifacts, things that should be there, that date back to the time of De Soto. We know that he came through this general area. In fact, if you go downtown, I'll show it to you tomorrow, but if you go downtown in front of the old library, there's a sign that says De Soto in Georgia. Pretty sure he came through here. My question for you is, how do we know that? Is this prehistory or history? Somebody wrote it down. So we've got a good idea of where De Soto went, because at least 3 of his men kept journals. It's kind of like, and I used this example earlier today, if your mom and dad sent you to Europe after you graduate from high school, they give you a backpack, they give you some euros, they send you to Europe, and you walk around Europe. You go to Switzerland, you look at the Alps. Probably every night when you lay down in your bed, you would take out your journal and go, today I saw the Alps. Tomorrow I'll probably fall off the Alps. Okay? But you're going to write because you want to be able to remember it, right? You want to be able to come back and tell mom and dad, hey, this was incredible. You're going to take pictures, but there's nothing like the written word. Yeah. That's the Everglades. It's a swamp. Or that might be it's Lake something or other. No, it's a lake. Yeah, it does. No. I'll figure it out. We know this because at least 3 of his men kept journals. And so we know with certainty where they landed. We're pretty sure this is the route that he took. Goes, huh? No, he's walking, riding a horse. So they get all the way over to the Mississippi River. De Soto dies. He's buried in the river. Moscoso goes into Texas and then comes back, and they go down the Mississippi River into the Gulf of Mexico, and they go home. Why do we know that? Because this is now history. Prehistory's over. Man can write. Man can record what he's doing, what he's seen, what he's experienced. And one of the things that these men wrote about were things like this. De Soto and his men were very cruel toward the Indians. They cut off their hands. Now think about that for a second. What do you do with your hands every day? A lot of stuff, right? You write, okay? You read, pick up your phone, you eat. Well, what if your hands are suddenly gone? Can you defend yourself? Not really. Can you grow food? If you can't grow food, can you eat? No. So what happens to you? You die. And you die a kind of a torturous death. You're going to starve to death. Okay? And then they would cut off their noses. Now, that's the interesting thing. Why would they cut off their noses? They can still breathe. I can breathe without this thing, without this big old Seagraves honker. I can breathe without it. But I can even smell. Okay. But what I can't do anymore is filter out impurities. I can't filter out bacteria that's in the air. And so what does it do? It goes straight into my sinus cavity. And what does that do? It kills me eventually because I get an infection and I die. Is it going to be? And so, it's cruelty that I have a hard time imagining. Okay. And they also brought dogs with them. Now, the Indians, the Native Americans actually had dogs. Dogs had been domesticated. They were pets. But the Spaniards brought them as hunting dogs. And they were not little foo-foo, the French poodle. These were like mastiffs. They were big dogs. And they were trained to tear people apart. And so they were leashed or loosed out on the Native Americans. And then, they just killed them. We'll kill them. All right. So that leads me to this painting. Pretty sure the title of this is DeSoto Finds the Mississippi. He discovers the Mississippi River. And based on what we know about Hernando de Soto, my question for you is this, and you can't see it because that little thing's in the way, is should this picture be hanging in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol? Because today it does. And it's hung there for a long time. I think there's 7 additional portraits or paintings like this that depict American history. There's Pocahontas she's either being married or being baptized. There is the signing of the Declaration of Independence. There is Cornwallis surrendering at Yorktown, Washington, General Washington there. And then there's this one. And again, based on what we know about Hernando de Soto, is that something that should be hanging in our capital? Is it appropriate? And that I don't want you to answer that yet. Okay? Is that something that is appropriate? Because again, it does hang there. What I want you to do is you can actually do it down at the bottom of your notes, that blank space down at the bottom, is answer that question. Should this picture be hanging in the U.S. Capitol? And defend your answer. Don't give me just yes. Okay? Give me yes and why, or no and why. And you're going to have 2. If I can get my big old ring out of the way, I'll push the button. Isn't that pretty? All right, go ahead. All right. How much time we got left? 2, 1, 0. All right. So what do you think? Raise your hand. What do you think? Okay. So do we still have Native Americans living in the United States? You think they're okay with that? Probably upsets them a little bit when they walk in the rotunda. Ava? Okay. All right. You know both those answers? Which one was right, by the way? Which one was right, Miss Lee? They were both right. Why? They were opinion. They weren't just opinion. Things that we know, things that we might have heard, things that we've read. And so I'm okay with both of those. Anybody else? Daisy? Yes. All right. She's on the way. Emily. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I hadn't actually put those two together, but that's a good way to look at that. Other people that have done things like this, we don't glorify at all, do we? Yeah. Cole? Okay, so we got a fence rider, right? He's lukewarm. But he actually, I'm okay with that. Okay. And what I like, what encourages me as I've heard you give those answers is that you just didn't say yes. You actually put some thought into why you think the way you do. And I'm okay with that. You can defend your answer. And you need to be able to do that. History is filled with things like this, where we're asked to make difficult decisions. And by the way, this is not a difficult decision. I told fifth period or seventh, no, y'all are seventh period, aren't you? What time is it? Oh, yeah. 2:49. Remind me not to let him run the atomic clock, okay? I told fifth period. If I can remember what I told fifth period. What was I talking about? Oh, I know what it was. I told fifth period, I'm probably the only history teacher in America today that is talking about the problem associated with this picture. Because it doesn't bother people. It really doesn't. Nobody thinks about it. Nobody remembers it. And maybe that's the problem, that nobody does. But I think it's a great way for us to start looking at things that some people might find offensive and answer the question, should they go or should they stay? I know, for example, today in Richmond, Virginia, they are taking down a statue of Robert E. Lee. It's probably going into a museum. Okay? And you know what? I'm fine with that. I really am. The more I learn about Robert E. Lee, the more fine I am with that. And I didn't always think that way, but I've learned, I've read, I've done research, and I'm okay with that. And let me kind of back up a little bit. I'm okay with this picture hanging in the rotunda. You know why? I think Ava hit on it. It's a reminder. It's not a reminder of how DeSoto treated the Native Americans because, I mean, honestly, you look at that picture and they look okay. I mean, they all got their noses. I think they all got two hands. Okay. They look a little frightened. But knowing the DeSoto story, when I look at that, and every time I've ever walked in the Capitol building, I've looked at that picture and I've been reminded of what I do not want to be, of the kind of person I do not want to be. I don't want to be a person that looks at others as being beneath me or less than me. There's a statue right out here. It is a Confederate statue. Okay, it was put up in the early 1900s by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And we'll talk about them. Put it on the big table. And we'll talk about them. But you know what? I'm okay with it being there, not because I, am a Southern man, but I'm okay with it because when I ride by it, I'm reminded of the kind of person I do not want to be. At the same time, if a group of people say, you know what, we need to get rid of that, we need to put it in a museum or put it, somewhere else, I'm okay with that. Okay? Because I know the kind of person I don't want to be, right? Okay. So I say all that, and we'll leave on this thought. One of the things I want us to be able to do in here is to talk about things that are difficult to talk about. I want us to be able to talk about slavery. I want us to be able to talk about racism and how it showed itself after the Civil War and really right up until the 1960s.
Please be there no later than 2:35. High school drill will be in formation spots this afternoon.
Okay. I want us to be able to talk about that. And at the end of the day, when we walk out the door at 2:25, we're okay with each other. Okay? Because we understand we're trying to find out what's true and what's not. And there's a lot of stuff in history that we read about that's just it's simply not true. Somebody thought it was a good idea, but it wasn't true. And so our job is to kind of figure that out. So anyway, thanks. Drill will be on Grant Parade. And do I have a staff ossifer in here? I don't think I do. I mean, you're on staff. Would y'all tell